You're listening to The South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast by Ohio State fans for Ohio State fans, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, and SoundCloud. Welcome back to The South Stands, everyone. From San Francisco, I'm your host, Zach Moore. This afternoon, I'm very happy to be joined in the Mountain Time Zone by Paige, and in the Eastern Time Zone by Matt, Tim, and Chad. Today is Sunday, October 13th, and as you all know, the Buckeyes did not play yesterday. They've been enjoying one of two off weeks they'll have during the 2019 season. But we thought we'd spend a little time looking back at the first half of the season, and also looking forward to what should be a pretty challenging second half. There were also several games of interest around the country involving top 25 teams yesterday. We'll spend a little time talking about those results as well. So, fellas, yesterday I spent a little time going through some of our emails from the preseason to see how some of our predictions were holding up. And back in July and August, I had asked each of you to give me your top 3 players to watch or position groups to watch going into the season, as well as a prediction on Ohio State's regular season record. I think not all of us chimed in on both, but I have a little bit of both from each of you guys. So, Tim, I'm going to start with you. You're pretty bullish on this team going into the season. You had them going 12-0. And you mentioned the 3 players to watch. Your top 3 players to watch were J.K. Dobbins, Jeffrey Okudah, and Baron Browning. Why don't you talk a little bit about your preseason expectations relative to what you've seen so far?
So I think they're pretty consistent with what I thought. I think those 3 players have played well. I think Browning in particular, Browning and Dobbins probably the most impressive of the 2. Okudah's been good. And, obviously the other one is Fields, who I didn't think would be as good as he's been. He's been, I think, better than everybody thought he would be. I think so far this season, I've been super impressed with the team doing what they're supposed to do. Again, I keep coming back to the fact that they haven't really played anybody yet, but they've done all they can do against the people that they've played with, and that's all you can ask them to do. I think similarly, and I know we're going to talk about this later, you could say the same for Penn State. But last night didn't look very good from either side of Penn State or Iowa. We'll get into that later. But just looking at the players that Ohio State has, the biggest change that I see, and I know this is again another topic for in a few minutes, is I think the way that they're being coached is getting the most out of them. And I don't think that was the case last year or even the year before or even maybe the year before that. And I think that's been, to me, I think that was the biggest unknown going into the season is, well, how good is Ryan Day? And I think we've got a partial answer, but so far the answer is beyond where we all thought it was going to be.
You said something in one of the preseason prediction threads that resonated with me. You felt that a fresh infusion of energy with the new coaching staff, coupled with a pretty loaded roster left over from the Meyer regime, might be just what this program needs. And I think I agree with that. I definitely agree with that. Chad, you were also pretty bullish on the Buckeyes going into the season. You have them at 12-0 as well. You said you thought Ryan Day's put together one of the best staffs in college football. You felt the Ohio State defense would look nothing like it did in 2018, and you also felt Justin Fields would be adjusted and ready to go in time for the Nebraska game, and you were right on all of those things. You also said something that I thought was interesting, that you thought the night game at Northwestern would be more difficult than the Nebraska game, and I wanted to get your thoughts on that as well. But first, why don't you give me your view of Ohio State through 6 games versus your expectations going into the season?
Well, it's so refreshing to see where this team is. Like we said, our teams that we played, have not been the best. But, we go into Nebraska. That's a hostile place to play. You've got Fields, who's never played in an environment like that. It's just been, I think the coaching staff, like I said, has made some just amazing adjustments when needed. And, I felt like Ryan Day was going to be the man all along. And that's obvious in his continuous recruiting that he's bringing in right now. The team just looks to be like hitting on all cylinders, and I can't wait to play Wisconsin.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, I feel pretty good about, when I said that about the Northwestern game, I thought it might be a little bit of a trap, or a little bit of something we'd fall into, like on a Friday night game and whatnot. But that has since kind of I think that's just going to be a blowout.
So you're not as concerned about it now as you were at the start of the year?
No,
okay.
No, not at all. I really don't even think it will be a game. I mean, I think, with the way things are going now with the LSU, jumping us, all that stuff, which the polls don't mean shit, but I think Day will keep the gas down and we'll win that game by 4 touchdowns, which we can talk later. But
all right.
So I'm just impressed with the team all over, man. Defensive wise, offense, O-line. So nice to see that O-line playing well.
Yeah.
Some of those guys like we had mentioned, Baron Browning. So.
Yeah, well, I would say so far that the 3 things that you mentioned in your initial prediction way back in July, just that the D would be transformed, Fields would develop and be ready to go by that Nebraska game, which was the game that we identified as the first big game of the season. And so far, you may be right. Ryan Day has put together a very good staff. I don't know where most people would rank that staff relative to the rest of the country, but it's been pretty impressive. Paige, okay, so I think you had Ohio State dropping 2 games. I think you had them at 10-2, but you had a caveat, which was if the defense could return to a top 20 unit, then maybe you thought they could do better than 10-2. Now 10-2 is still on the table, right? We're only 6 games in, but what do you see so far that stands out to you relative to your expectations?
So before we get into that, Zach, I'm kind of curious. How are you so confident that the team is enjoying their bye week? Do you have some access now that the rest of us aren't privy to?
No. That's just an assumption on my part. They were pretty beat up after that Michigan State game. I mean, there were 3 or 4 Ohio State players limping off the field. I'm just assuming that they enjoyed not playing. But
getting healthy. That makes sense. No, it's not. I guess I would have to say I'm pretty surprised that they have looked as good as they have over the course of these 6 games. It'll get tougher, down the stretch. So, let's not all start patting each other's on the backs on our predictions because we're only halfway there. But that being said, I mean, I was wrong. And, Tim and Chad were definitely more spot on. And I think you were as well as far as, what your expectations were of this team. There is hardly anything I think that you could pick to criticize them at this point. The coaching, the players, the scheme, you name it. Just getting up at the right times. Not letting off the gas. When they've got a team down. Adjusting when they've gotten punched in the mouth. I mean, seriously, like what could you potentially criticize them for at this point? I think they are exceeding expectations across the board. I know we're going to get into some more specifics. But at this point, it's been really amazing to watch.
You did say that you did had one big question about Ryan Day as a coach, which was, and I think you described this as his biggest hurdle, which would be getting this team up for big games, and that's still kind of to be determined, right? Because their biggest games are in front of them. But that was certainly something Meyer was exceptional at, and I think I think that makes sense to question whether or not he can get them up for these really, really big games. It remains to be seen.
Yeah, and to this point, he's passed the test, but there haven't been that many tests, and it's really a testament to Urban, who was just phenomenal. As an underdog, getting his teams up for the biggest games, and that goes to how you actually coach those games, right? Mm-hmm. In-day adjustments in your biggest games, your rivalry games, playoff games. He wasn't perfect, obviously, in some of the playoff games, but he was just amazing in that regard. And, Day hasn't had as many opportunities, But so far, it looks like the moment won't be too big for him, right? I mean,
seem like it.
I think, I not to make any analogies to, pro football and stuff like that, but being the head coach of a major program like this, in the NFL, there are certain guys that it's just too overwhelming for them. And at this point, I thought that was something that, Day, we knew he'd bring in good players and, so on and so forth, but how he would handle those gigantic moments in the biggest games is, one thing I had questions on.
Makes
and
sense.
We're going to see it here in these next 6 games, but, so far so good.
Matt, I went through my inbox and I didn't see a prediction from you on Ohio State's regular season record, so I apologize if I missed it and if you did give one. But you did mention I thought it was interesting when I had asked for the 3 players to watch or position groups to watch going into the season. You actually opted to go the coach route, and you had mentioned Al Washington, number 1, because linebacker play is going to be crucial this year. It had been so bad the last 2 years. Hafley and Madison, the experiment of those 2 as co-defensive coordinators, as you said in your email, the co-word doesn't resonate in OSU lore too loudly. And then Ryan Day, obviously, it's his show. So I thought that was those are some good insights on obviously a very important aspect of this season was the new coaching staff. Why don't you talk a little bit about how you see the season relative to your expectations?
Well, to Paige's point, the Coach Day being overwhelmed, I'm sure that lasts for what they probably register them in nanoseconds because you just look out the door of his office and see a bunch of 5 stars and 4 stars walking around. And I'm sure that kind of calms you down a little bit. My idea, like Timmy and I actually had a nice afternoon meeting at Del Frisco's where we explored this topic, and he pushed me on like, okay, what do you think? And my point to him was, look, I don't know anything about Justin Fields other than people like him a lot. I don't know anything about what's going to happen with the offensive line, but the new coach, it could work. He could get him motivated. I don't know how the defensive coordinator is going to work. And I was like, there's too many question marks for me to make a prediction. And he's like, if pushed, what prediction would you say? I'm like, well, if all things run well, they should be undefeated. So that was my official prediction. The only thing that I'm really concerned about with these guys, and it's not really a lot. It's like, yeah, it's about the test, but it's also about next man up on the offense, especially if there's a quarterback issue. If he goes down for a series or 2, I mean, geez, we were all kind of nervous when what's his name, JT went down and Haskins came in, saved the. JT went down again, and Cardell. So do we have anything like that in case Fields goes down? And that's my biggest concern because I'm not very confident in that area. But as much as everything has kind of coalesced into something that beyond my expectations, how well they are doing. And to the other points that were made about, not being tested, they haven't been, but they've been tested where teams have been getting the yardage on them and they made the appropriate adjustments, which I liked. Like the Michigan State game is probably the best example where they were getting kind of game taken to them and they kind of had to respond to that aggressiveness. And I thought the offense and defense did well to kind of respond to it. And that's the most encouraging thing.
Yeah. And a lot of that comes back to coaching, which you identified, before the season even started as a huge factor. So kudos to you for that. My prediction was 11-1. And I was wrong. I thought, certainly about one game, which I thought Ohio State's only loss would be to Nebraska in Lincoln. And I thought Ohio State would get the revenge on Nebraska in the Big Ten title game. That was my big prediction, which has already gone awry. But I did think Ryan Day's first year would be much more like Earl Bruce's or Urban Meyer's first seasons at Ohio State than, say, Jim Tressel's or John Cooper's, where I felt the infrastructure was in place, there was enough talent there, that if Day was able to push the right buttons, he could get this team back to the playoff. And was ultimately my prediction: 11-1, Big Ten championship, and Ohio State would get back to the playoff. Now I'm thinking they're gonna have to go undefeated. We'll talk about this later as we look at some other results around the country. The three players that I had identified to watch going into this year that I was going to be watching closely were obviously Justin Fields, and I didn't see any reason that Fields couldn't be an all Big Ten quarterback as a first-year starter like J.T. Barrett and Dwayne Haskins were. I felt he had every bit the talent. He had every bit the talent and the skill positions around him, and I thought he had an excellent quarterback-focused coach in Ryan Day that could get him there. So I actually set his statistical floor at a 65% completion percentage, 2,800 yards passing, 34 passing touchdowns, 10 interceptions, 900 yards rushing, and 11 rushing TDs. I got all those numbers from J.T. Barrett's first season in 2014 as OSU starting quarterback. I felt like Justin Fields could do at least that well, statistically speaking. And so far, he's completing almost 70% of his passes, almost 5 percentage points better than Barrett did hit that first season. He's at about 1,300 yards passing. I think he's actually going to add a lot more passing yards his second half. Even though the competition's going to stiffen, he's going to play 4 quarters. He had a lot of these games where he only played 3 quarters here in the first half of the year. He's already at 18 passing touchdowns. He only has 1 pick. He's only at 283 rushing yards. I know he's got a ways to go, but honestly, I think, Matt, to your point, we don't want to use him that much as a runner because there's really no one behind him. And he has 8 rushing TDs as well. So, Paige, you and I were talking about Fields going into this season, and there was this sentiment, not just from you and me, but just kind of, across the board, that Fields, there's no way he could duplicate 50 touchdowns, which is what Dwayne Haskins was responsible for last year passing-wise. But I felt like Fields could account for as many, and I think he's well on his way to that. He's got 26 through 6 games. The second player I wanted to watch was Taraja Mitchell. I was totally wrong about him. He's been a complete non-factor. I honestly think he's probably going to have to wait till Tough Borland graduates to get his opportunity, because I'm not sure where there's going to be playing time for him, especially with Baron Browning playing as well as he has. Finally, Damon Arnett was the third player that I was watching going into the season. I thought he'd be transformed this season under Hafley, and so far he's been as good as we've hoped he could be. He had the 96-yard pick 6 against Indiana, forced fumble against Michigan State. He's second on the team in pass breakups with Jeffrey Okudah. I think he made a great career move coming back to Ohio State. I think his draft stock is going up every week. So good for him on that. Any other comments from you guys on preseason predictions before we move on to the next topic? No? Okay. There's one other question, I guess question that I want to get answered from each of you. Tim, what I'd like is one important area where this Ohio State team through 6 games is different or improved from 2018. Tim, I'm going to kick it back to you. What is that one area in your view?
Well, I think you could pick a lot of different things because I think there's a lot of areas of the team that are improved, but I'm going to try and go with something that's maybe not as obvious. I mean, it kind of is if you watch the games, but I'm really pleased with the O-line. And, if I think back to last year, you had Michael Jordan playing center. He wasn't a center. Sometimes there were snap issues.
Mm-hmm.
He just wasn't great at that position. You had Isaiah Prince, who just had, I don't know, what did he have, 2 million false start penalties last year at critical times. I mean, it's not just that he had that many, but, they were at the worst times. And sometimes he had, 2 or 3 in a row. The guy was awful. And, that's not to mention blocking. I think that with Haskins as the quarterback, there was this idea that, we're so used to pass blocking, we're not used to run blocking, so we can't, we can't run block because we're pass blocking all the time. I don't know, there was some lame excuse as to why Dobbins couldn't get any holes. And so when I kind of think about the protection that Fields has had, the holes that Dobbins has had, part of the reason why I think the offense, the big part of the reason why I think the offense looks as good as it does is because of those guys. I think you've got a natural center in Myers, and then you've got some really good guys. Davis is just a total stud. Bowen's a fifth-year senior, so he provides some senior leadership. And, I think, the offense all starts with the O-line. And for me, I think that's been one of the bright spots this year because I think, Stud was on. I think he was kind of on the line there. Is he going to? Is Day going to keep him or is he not?
Mm-hmm.
I think he decided to keep him. It looks like it's been a great call, and they continue to do well in recruiting. And that offensive line, even with some new starters, is absolutely clicking. So to me, that's been the bright surprise.
Nice. I couldn't agree with you more on the offensive line. Chad, what do you see as the one important area where Ohio State is different or improved from 2018?
Giving up big yardage plays.
Oh, amen.
Oh my God! I mean, how many times last year was it just ridiculous?
Oh.
Peeling off 25 to 30-yard runs and just and that stupid scheme we're running. But I'll keep it short and sweet. I agree with Tim on the O-line too. And Josh Myers is an absolute beast. He's just a wrecking ball at center. And what's nice is that next year you're going to have Miller coming in, probably going to be the starting center. Myers is going to move over to guard. But yeah, that's my the defense is not giving up big plays.
All right, Paige.
So I'll keep it short and sweet.
Sounds good. Paige, how about you?
So it's got to be the defense, right? I mean, but we all knew that was obvious. I was thinking about on my ride today. I was like, they could have just fired the entire defensive coaching staff and made me the defensive coordinator or any one of us the defensive coordinators and literally just sat there and done nothing, not moved, not said a goddamn word, and just put players out on the field because at the end of the day, our players are better than every other team's players except for maybe two or three teams. And for them to be so bad last year was there was no excuse for it.
No.
And so to say that this team, should not have a top 20 ranked defense across the board just with the amount of talent that they have is ludicrous. And so how that ever happened again last year, again, I think I said it on an earlier pod, like someone's going to do a documentary on that. But the most improved part of this team is the defense. The offensive line has been great. I agree with Tim and Chad on that. I think that is paying huge dividends, not only to Dobbins, but also for Fields. I mean, let's just be honest. When he's back there passing, he's got all day. I mean, in pass protection, they're just amazing. And then, they start to wear people down. So they get honorable mention for me, but just having, a defense that is, right what we should expect them to be and actually exceeding expectations is the area that has, taken this team from, maybe losing a game or two. We're really, the expectations are playoff or, an undefeated season.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's what you said in the preseason, right? I mean, you said before the season started, you could see Ohio State losing 2 games, but the caveat was if the defense could return to being a top 20 unit nationally, and they've certainly done that. And so far, I agree with you. They've made a huge difference. Matt, how about you?
You coached the defense, Paige. What kind of ride was that? A long ride?
It was a long 2-hour ride, baby.
Yeah. I think you were pulling.
Yeah, but I would just sit there.
I think I agree with what everyone has said. I think Washington, Al Washington, and the linebacker play has been outstanding, especially how he's worked in the players that he has, like Werner. I mean, we were always dissing on Tough Borland, but I think he's been used really well this year. There's only been a couple times where I really thought that he was probably putting it on the wrong play, but he seems like he's playing well too. I think for that level of using Browning, using Werner, but Malik Harrison, I mean, jeez. So that to me has been the biggest improvement, but I agree with what everyone else has said. Those things, you can't really point to one thing and say just that. We also haven't been giving up too many penalties either. So, and that was to Tim's point earlier. Like that was being hamstrung by that every game was just not fun for the fan and not fun for the team. So,
Matt, I just want to back up what you've said about the linebacker play this year. So far, through 6 games, I'm looking at the statistics right here. Malik Harrison, Baron Browning, Pete Werner, they're 2, 3, and 4 on the team in tackles. Malik Harrison has 9 tackles for loss. That's more than he had all of last year. He had 8.5 tackles for loss last year in 2018. He's got 9 already through 6 games. Baron Browning has 5 tackles for loss, and Pete Werner has 4. So yeah, you've starting to see an improvement. I mean, it's showing up in the stats, right? It's not just anecdotal. They are better at linebacker. There's no question about it, and that's made a huge difference. For me, I guess I'm going to go. Mine is more of an intangible. I think that's difficult to quantify, admittedly, but I think it's toughness. And I know I've said it probably on every single one of these pods. I've made reference to the fact that Ryan Day preached toughness the entire offseason. And I think we've seen it manifest itself in the way Ohio State has overwhelmed its opponents in the second quarter. They've shown the ability to take an early punch and then respond with haymakers and finish games before the half. You know, by comparison, in 2018, middling teams like Indiana, Minnesota, Nebraska, all 3 of those teams came into the shoe and competed with Ohio State well into the fourth quarter. Ohio State, they just seemed that it took them 3-4 quarters to respond to what they were seeing from those teams. And of course, we all remember the Purdue game where Ohio State never answered the bell. And they let a 5-7 Maryland team scored 51 on them. I mean, the Terps really controlled that game for 3.5 quarters. So honestly, that's a game Ohio State should have lost. The Maryland game, I almost think of that as a loss. So you're seeing a lot less of that, right? You're seeing Ohio State respond to those early punches with big-time haymakers, and they're finishing these games by halftime. That's one difference. The other thing, late last year, you saw Ohio State with the tendency to let inferior opponents back into games. They might jump out to an early lead, but we saw that in the Big Ten title game with Northwestern. They had a 24-7 halftime lead in that game, and they let Northwestern back into that one. Same in the Rose Bowl. We took a 28-0 lead in the fourth quarter. We had to fall on a damn onside kick to eke that game out. So I think toughness, mental toughness, I think Ryan Day identified that from last year's team and really harped on it. And I remember asking Doug LeMarie about this on his the text service that he has, because he does answer texts. And I asked him about why is Ryan Day, harping so much on toughness. And I actually questioned LeMarie a little bit on his response. LeMarie kind of said, well, no, he's just a really nice guy and he wants these guys to respect him and la la la. And I'm like, no, that doesn't resonate with me. That doesn't ring true to me. I think Day, I don't think that's a concern at all with Day. I think he has command of that team. He has the respect of those players. I think he saw a team last year that had trouble sustaining effort and intensity for 4 quarters. It was a problem for him all year, and he identified that during the offseason. And so far through 6 games, it hasn't been an issue. So toughness for me is really the difference between this year and last. Does anybody else want to mention?
What do you think he's doing different, though? I mean, so that's an interesting, and I agree with you, but what is it that he's doing different? I mean, did he take away the croissants at the buffet table to toughen these guys up?
I mean, nobody knows. We're all guessing, right? Because nobody, not even the beat writers, have access to practices. But I guess I'm just seeing the results.
Well, I think that just because we saw a speech when he gave the game ball, was it last week?
To Marotti, yeah, that's right.
He said, like, we talk about toughness a lot. So I think it's just the thing of making that a primary issue when they talk about what their expectations are of the players. It's just like everyone here, I want you to see playing a tough brand of football. And I think that how that permeates through their criticisms or ways that they go about player development, I think that's one of the things that they're looking for. So it's something that makes it achievable. If you vocalize it, then it's something that everyone can understand without question that this is an importance to the coach and to the program.
Yeah. I mean, we always like to say on this podcast that we're not trained media professionals. We don't have access to players or coaches. And so I am basically just guessing. But last week watching Michigan State kind of take it to Ohio State in the first quarter using a very familiar formula, dragging Ohio State into the mud and trying to turn that game into a slog. And it's worked in the past, right? It several times over the last 6-7 years, that formula has worked. But Ohio State, you saw the response in the second quarter, and they landed some big-time haymakers in that game and really broke. You could start to see Michigan State's players arguing with each other, getting visibly frustrated, and I really thought that speaks to toughness. But I don't. What the hell do I know?
So don't get me wrong, Zach. I actually agree with you 100%. I think it would be an interesting question for someone to ask Day. Say, hey, give me 3 specific examples of how you address this or things that you're doing in practice to increase the toughness for these guys. Because I do agree with you. I think we all see it. I'm just kind of curious what he did to try and have it manifest itself on the field.
Yeah, I would love one of these guys to really kind of press Day on the whole toughness question and see what he says. All right, fellas. So,
well, I also think part of that has to do with, Sloaner's point of the coaching framework and the coaching superstructure. So you've got Meyer last year, who's got a tumor in his head and has been kind of checked out for a couple years, and you've got Bill Davis, who's fucking awful, and you've got Schiano, who wasn't doing a great job. I mean, these guys were terrible. And you had Alex Grinch back there, who was supposed to have Schiano's job, but Schiano didn't leave, and so then he got relegated to the backs job or whatever he had, and you had a giant clusterfuck of coaching. Mm-hmm. And Day said it himself in the Purdue game. At the end of the game, the players quit. He saw them quit. And to him, I think when coaches have players' backs, I think you can achieve toughness. I think they'll give you everything. I think that's what he's been able to do, is go out there and get that out of these guys, because we've seen him. I mean, Hafley and Day have both taken the blame for a bad play or a bad incident on the field away from the players. And they said, no, that was my fault. And so these guys know the coaches have their backs, and they're going to run through walls for them. And that's tough. That makes them tougher. And so I'm sure that there's some concepts that he wanted to get through in practice and things like that, but I think that toughness starts with, any of these guys can be tough. I mean, Baron Browning said it. He said the relationship with the coach, and he didn't define the coach. It could have been Meyer, it could have been Davis, could have been Schiano, was severed. There was no relationship there. Mm-hmm. And at that point in time, you're just not going to play. And so if you're going to play, you're going to play soft. And so I think a big part of the way he got toughness back was to say, I'm on your side, I got your back, we're in this together, I'm going to make you a better player, you go out there and show me what you can do. And I think that makes players want to play harder. And I think that's part of toughness.
That's a good point, Tim. Yeah, that's a really good point. You were making reference to a piece that came out in Cleveland.com about Baron Browning, where he had said in the piece that he felt there was someone within the program that had given up on him, and he didn't identify who that person was. Just wanted to set the context there. Well, yep. All right. So Tim, I think this is a great segue into our next topic. So there is a perception of what's happening that's starting to gain momentum. The perception being that Ryan Day is an upgrade over Urban Meyer. And there was a good debate, and let me just set the stage here on this one. I was listening to the Cleveland.com podcast, and Doug Lesmarie went on his kind of one of his signature rants about, one of the writers, one of their texters had written in and had basically proposed the idea that maybe Ryan Day is an upgrade, or maybe he's a better coach. And Lesmarie went on a rant about, he said something to the effect of, well, it's crazy how we now seem to be looking back on a coach in Urban Meyer who only lost 9 games in 7 seasons and saying to ourselves, man, I'm glad that guy's gone. Which I agree. If that's what some fans are thinking, only 6 games into the Ryan Day era, that is pretty silly. I mean, in aggregate, what Meyer accomplished at Ohio State was very, very impressive. I mean, he went 83-9, 7-0 against Michigan, 3 Big Ten titles, 1 national championship. We know about the other 2 titles that he won at Florida. But something does seem to be different this year. Tim, you had started to get to it in your last comments. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that. Is it just perception? Are we seeing something different that's sustainable over time? What do you guys think? Paige, I want to kick it to you. What do you think of this notion that maybe Ryan Day is kind of just what the program needs right now?
Well, so to start off, you were on this point, Zach, in the preseason, right? Because it really comes down to, what are you comparing Ryan Day to? Are you comparing Ryan Day to, Urban Meyer in his first couple of years at Florida and his first couple of years at Ohio State versus his latter years at Florida and his latter years at Ohio State? There was an obvious decline in Meyer, probably, medically related. And so in this particular case, I think more than one thing can be true. Two things can be true at the same time. Mm-hmm. He is an upgrade over, the last 2 years of Urban Meyer. That being said, he's a long fucking way from having the resume that Urban Meyer has. Let's just pump the brakes on that right now. I mean, he could lose 2 out of the next 3 and, the sky falls. So let's just be, let's hold off on, giving him the lifetime contract. It's like, how long before that chatter starts, right? Oh, Washington's going to come get him and we got to lock him up. He's only making $3 million. It's like, hey, if he goes out and pulls it out and wins a national championship this year, that's a different story. But we are a long way from that. But back to your original point, he is an upgrade over, 2018 and 17 Meyer. I don't think you can even remotely say that, though, when you're talking about the full resume of Meyer as a whole.
Yeah, that's a good point. Chad, what do you have to say about this? I know you've mentioned in previous podcasts that you really like what you're seeing from Ryan Day. What do you think?
Well, I'll take him over Urban any day.
Wow.
I mean, you can have Urban back. There's this team's playing with a whole chip on their shoulder.
Wow.
I'm not kidding. I mean, I love Urban, but I'll take Dave anytime.
Wow.
He's got some kids playing, you listen to him talk in his press conferences, and it's just a whole different level, man. He's got these kids playing with a chip on their shoulder. He's, got, like I said, I've said many times, arguably top 2 or 3, if not best college football staff in the country. And I mean, I just like he's because offense, you don't know what he's going to do. He's spread it out. He's put the fastest players on the field on defense, and Urban just didn't do that shit. And it's just it's really not a long topic for me to discuss. I'll take that any time.
It's a bold statement.
I got to jump in there. That's asinine, dude. He's
whatever,
coached
Paige,
9
I'm talking
games.
about right now, here and today. He's a fucking better coach than fucking Urban, and he's going to fucking take this team to higher places than Urban did. That's a fact.
Wow.
That is not a fact. Number one, that is not a fact.
Championships within the next 3 years, and that's all I'm going to say about it.
So you're speculating on what could happen. Let's stick to what has happened. Okay? I could win the Powerball tonight, but it's unlikely. So let's just stick to the facts. And for you to say that he very well may take the program to the next level.
I said I'll take him over Urban. So just you pump the brakes on coming at me about that. I said I'll take him over Urban. That's it.
Matt?
Well, then fine.
I'm interested to get Matt's take on this. Matt, what do you think?
Well, that was fun. So I think that there's no question that the Urban Meyer that we had the last 2 seasons is in vintage, or the Urban Meyer it's where you attach to the name. So where a Day has taken the program, I mean, the Purdue game last year, come on. A prime Urban Meyer would never let that game happen.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, we needed an upgrade, and I can't think of – we needed something different. I don't even know an upgrade. We needed something different. We need some fresh, young, enthusiastic but smart, experienced people to come in here and take over the program, get the position coaching right, and get the culture right. And you sometimes have to bring that in for new breaths of fresh air in here. That being said, I mean, we're still on the honeymoon with the guy. I mean, shit, man, we haven't even done 69s with each other yet. You got to get a little trophy, a little hardware in our hands yet anything's going on. We haven't even won the conference championship yet. So potentially, yeah, but I just think that what we needed, we got, and we're lucky to get it because I can't, actually Tim and I had this conversation on the off season. I was like, I hope they give it to Day because he did well in the interim. In the games that he subbed in interim. And Tim was like, well, I think we need someone bigger name. And he's like, but I like Day. So it's like, we could have gotten that wrong too and got someone that, I don't know, someone who was a bigger name to come in there, similar to like what Michigan usually does. But no, I mean, I think that you can't, if you put the records next to each other, you take a prime Urban. Yeah, you take a prime Urban over Day because Day's got an incomplete kind of portfolio right now.
Mm-hmm. Tim, what do you think?
Settle it. Settle it.
So, I'm kind of in Paige's camp. I think that you had two schools of Urban Meyer. You had 12, 13, and 14, and that Urban Meyer you take against any other coach, including Nick Saban.
Yep.
In recent history. I think 15, 16, 17, 18, I just kind of go back to it. 15 was a disaster, right? It was the J.T. Barrett, Cardale Jones, dual quarterback. We had the best team in the country, and Meyer didn't get it done from a coaching standpoint of figuring that out. And then we lose to Michigan State on a last-second field goal at home. And so I just really think that what went on with him physically affected him. Mm-hmm. So I think I'm very happy with Day today. And it remains to be seen what he becomes. We just don't know. So I'm kind of playing the fence a little bit between Paige and Chad, but here's an interesting thing to think about. When you look around college football, kind of look at programs like Oklahoma, who went through just the same thing Ohio State did. Legend leaves, young guy comes in, and he's done really well. Look at Dabo Swinney, young guy, kind of built Clemson up, has done really well. Saban is kind of the old guard, but he probably doesn't have that much time left. I mean, I think the guy's in his late 60s.
Yeah.
So what I will say is that for today's player, I think Ryan Day appeals more to them than I think Urban Meyer may have, other than on the recruiting trail. I think Urban Meyer was the big name, and I want to go play for Nick Saban or Urban Meyer or Bear Bryant or one of those types of players. If you're a player like that, you can get starstruck by wanting to play for one of these really big-name coaches. But I actually think in the day-in and day-out coaching, I think Lincoln Riley, Dabo Swinney, and Ryan Day appeal more to the player of today than, say, an Urban Meyer did, who was just a fucking taskmaster and, frankly, towards the end, had his little pets, right? J.T. Barrett was his pet. There is no fucking way J.T. Barrett should have played football in 2017. No way. That should have been Dwayne Haskins all year long.
Yeah.
But because he was his pet, he played. Mm-hmm. Ezekiel Elliott was a pet. John Simon was a pet. I'm not saying these guys aren't good.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that, like, Meyer had his guys who were going to play no matter what because he liked them, and that wasn't always good for the team.
All right. I like that. Those are strong takes. Love it. So, I don't think the criticism of Urban Meyer in his latter years is unfair. I don't. And I can see where LeMarie is coming from, and those that would say, listen, in aggregate, what Urban Meyer did, he's a Hall of Fame coach. I believe he finishes with the highest winning percentage of any Ohio State coach. I agree. Amazing numbers, amazing feats. It'll be very difficult for anyone to duplicate. But he was clearly not the same coach in his latter years that he was his first 3 seasons at Ohio State. He was 35-1 in the regular season, his first 3 seasons at Ohio State. But Tim, Paige, as you guys have illustrated, there were missteps throughout the last few years of his tenure at Ohio State. And I don't think the criticism is unfair. Listen, Mike Valenti likes to say this about Michigan, and the same thing applies to Ohio State. You have 9 to 10 wins built into your schedule every single year. There are only 2, maybe 3 games every season where the outcome isn't certain. Okay? Ohio State was not paying Meyer $7.5 million a year to beat Indiana and Minnesota. He wasn't making $7.5 million to lose the only one game he couldn't afford to lose and just missed the playoffs, which happened in 2015, 2017, and 2018. 2 of the losses over that stretch were historic stink bombs that were utter embarrassment for the program. Okay? Now listen, that happened to John Cooper 3 different times in the mid to late 90s, 95, 96, and 98. He lost games in those seasons that he couldn't afford to lose, and we frickin' hated him for it. So the standard is what it is. It's ridiculously high. I get that. But he wasn't meeting the standard. I'm sorry. And I think he deserves the criticism is warranted. That said, let's give Ryan Day more than 6 games to build up his resume before we start comparing him to Urban Meyer, who obviously accomplished a lot at Ohio State. And if he decides to take that job at USC, he's going to be really good there. I mean, he could win another title there. We'll see about that.
Just one clarification, Zach. Cooper lost his one game to fucking Michigan every year.
That's true.
That is beyond fucking unacceptable.
That is.
Right. And Michigan State.
That is. You're right. But, losing by 30 at a 6-6 Purdue, or losing by 30 at a 6-6 Iowa, whatever they finished, that wasn't pretty either. I guess the point I was trying to make is just that, Meyer had a succession of seasons where he lost the one game, either in the case of Michigan State, you lose to an interdivisional rival. You can't afford to lose that game that late in the season. You can't make it back up. Or you lose to Iowa. It's your second loss of the season. You absolutely positively can't afford to have it, and yet you lose it. Or you lose to Purdue in such embarrassing fashion it takes any playoff consideration off the table. I'm sorry, by his own admission, Urban Meyer would say that's not the standard for him. And I think the criticism is fair. But, hey, if you want to give me Urban Meyer of 2012, 2014 back, I'll take him every day of the week and twice on Sunday, for sure. Are there any other comments on that before we move on?
And I just want to set the record straight. I love Urban, okay? I'm just talking about, and I think Tim hit it kind of like right on the head. Today's player, I'll take Ryan Day. Mm-hmm. And Urban will not coach at USC. He's not taking another job.
I hope
if he
not.
took any job, he'd take the Notre Dame job if that came up. I don't think he's going to USC.
There's a lot of chatter around USC. A lot of chatter. I keep hearing it from every corner. And now he's in the studio with Leinart and Reggie Bush for another 2 months. No doubt those guys are working on him. He spent a lot of time in L.A. I hope you're right, Plummer. But you could see him walking. It's in the state of California, talent rich in terms of prep, high school talent. Didn't the power just go out there for like fucking 2 days? Oh. No, that's a good point. That's true. Yeah, that's true. Good point. Well, that's a conversation for another day. Sorry, go ahead.
So actually, Zach, it's a good way to sort of to answer the question, and it would be this: at this point, knowing what we all know, would any of us really care if he took that job? And I think the answer is no. Now, all summer, right, everyone would have been freaking out. Like, if he takes another fucking job and, at this point, I think most Ohio State fans would be like, fine, if that's what you want to do, go for it, because they're so comfortable with Day.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Go get him, buddy.
Certainly for the 2019 season, if we're just going to stay in the moment, stay in the present right now, I think for the 2019 season, Ryan Day was the right choice. And we'll see what happens, the second half of the season and beyond this year. But, Tim, you identified this. You mentioned this during the preseason. You thought the combination of a fresh infusion of coaching energy, ambition, attention to detail, coupled with the stockpile of talent left over from the Meyer regime could be a winning combination. And I think so far, I agree with you. I agreed with you then. And I think so far we're seeing that played out through 6 games.
Yep, I think that's exactly right. And just one quick thing on Meyer. I will say this: if Meyer goes to USC anytime soon, certainly if he goes to USC next year, I'll be fine with it. Go do whatever you want to do. But for me, what it will change is the narrative of 2018, which is he had to retire because of his physical issues and because he couldn't take the stress of coaching. He was falling down on the sidelines and like all this fucking bullshit. If he goes and coaches again this soon, then to me, it means nothing about that, because that's still there. It's not like that's gone away. They can't do anything about it, right? That medical issue isn't getting better.
Right.
And it just means that this was all about the Zach Smith issue, which I don't want to get into that. But to me, if he goes and coaches again this soon across the country and moves his family out of Columbus, where he's got his daughters are there and grandchildren and all that, to go coach fucking USC, then to me it tells a different story about what went on last year.
Interesting.
And let's remind the listeners, Timmy, that we've got a 5-year bet on this, and you were on record that he will not do that, and I am on record that he will do that.
I want to look ahead to the second half of this season, and I've got a few questions I want to put to each of you. The first question, Chad, I'm going to start with you. Which one position group do you think will continue to excel as the schedule gets tougher? And just try to keep it to one so you don't steal anybody else's thunder. Go ahead.
Right. I'm going to say it's going to be the defensive unit.
Okay. So
I think they're going to just get better and better as the time goes on. I think they're playing with chip on their shoulder. They know that they haven't looked like the defense of the past is filled with bullets, and I think that that's going to be a bright spot for us moving forward.
Okay, so within the defense, give me the one unit you think is going to continue to excel.
Chad, we have to ask twice. Not that hard of a question.
You like the linebackers?
Hey, man, what are you on my fucking ass for there, PVH?
All right, you like the linebackers.
Buddy.
Linebackers.
Okay, I'll say the linebackers.
All right, the linebackers. Okay, Tim?
Yeah.
What do you think going into the second half of the season? Who can we hang our hat on? What position group?
Pretty obvious, but they've been dominant. I think they're going to continue to be dominant. But the defensive line, Chase Young has been out of a lot of games because they've just been over so quickly, and he hasn't really gotten to show himself yet in a full sort of 4-quarter game against a really good offensive line. So I think against Wisconsin and Penn State and some of the other team, Maryland, that they have to play, I just think that position group's just going to continue to dominate.
Nice. Yeah, I would agree with you on that. Matt, what do you think?
Offensive line, protect the quarterback, make the holes.
All right. Okay. Paige?
Secondary. I think those guys, I'm hopeful they'll get tested a little bit more as the competition gets a little tougher here as we go down these next few games. So I'm looking for the secondary just to continue to dominate.
Mm-hmm. I'm with Tim. I think it's the defensive line, and I think it's Chase Young. I believe in Larry Johnson. I believe in the players they've recruited. You've got known commodities, starting with Chase Young. Guys have been in a lot of big games, have played well, certainly through the first 6 games, and I think they'll continue to play well as the competition stiffens. All right, good. What remaining game is the biggest concern for you? Let's keep it to one. What one remaining game is the biggest concern for you guys? Chad?
Penn State.
Penn State. Okay. Why?
Yeah. Well, I just feel like they have a more explosive offense than, even though it didn't show yesterday, obviously, but I think they've got, Wisconsin's got a hell of a defense, but, I feel they're pretty one-dimensional on offense. Penn State's got a couple pieces that I think that'll give us a test. So I said Penn State.
Yeah. I like their defensive front too. Defensively, that front seven looks pretty gnarly. Like it looks closer to the kind of front sevens Joe Paterno had back in the day. Tim, what game concerns you the most?
Well, there's only 2, right? There's Wisconsin and Penn State. So it's I think of those 2, they're both at home, which is great. I probably pick Wisconsin. I haven't watched Penn State, but I was not impressed last night. I totally agree with your comment about their front seven on defense. They've got Micah Parsons and some other real players up there. I think our offense will handle them. I don't know. Their offense looks pretty pedestrian, Penn State. So I think of Wisconsin as a bit of a more complete football team. I frankly think they're better coached. I think Paul Chris is a better coach than James Franklin. I think he's a blowhard. And so, those are the only games that should give anyone any concerns. It's got to be one of those 2. And I think Wisconsin will be a little tougher.
Matt, before I kick it over to you, I'm just going to go through the schedule here, the remaining 6 games. We're at Northwestern this Friday night. That game's on FS1, by the way. Then home against Wisconsin the following week. We get a bye the next week. Maryland at home, at Rutgers. Then on November the 23rd, Penn State at home. Then we go to Ann Arbor on the 30th of November to wrap up the regular season. Matt, which of those games worries you the most?
I would say the Wisconsin game for sure. I think that they got enough talent, and like what Tim alluded to, the coach is really strong. So
Okay.
that's the one I'm thinking is going to be the biggest test.
Paige?
Michigan, because let's just be clear, it's always Michigan. But the reason why, because we have Penn State the week before.
Damn it, you stole mine.
Which is just maddening, right?
Yeah.
That just shouldn't happen. So, it'll be on the road. It's the rivalry game, and the way the schedule's set up, I think that'll be Ryan Day's biggest test, is being able to get that team up twice in a row against, the 2 best teams on our schedule. I mean, Wisconsin, yeah, but Penn State and Michigan are the blue bloods. We're at a different level than Wisconsin, and I think just the way the schedule's set up, it's going to be the Michigan game.
You stole my thunder there, buddy. I agree with you. I think it's Michigan because of where it falls on the schedule. And the idea, that the possibility that Michigan would be getting a diminished, slightly, even if it's a slightly diminished Ohio State team after Penn State. You look at the way Penn State's played out the last 3 years. It was a 1-point game each of the last 2 years, and it was a 3-point game in Happy Valley. We lost on the blocked field goal back in 2016. James Franklin has his teams ready to play Ohio State. Now I would also argue that I don't think we played a remotely good game in 2017 and 2018 against Penn State. But the point is, I think Penn State could be an absolute, slobber knocker, and I think Ohio State could come out of that somewhat diminished for the Michigan game, which worries me. The other thing is, if Michigan can wake up to the fact that they actually have 4 pretty good wide receivers who are all going to be playing in the league, and start to utilize those guys, they could actually be a pretty dangerous offense, but they're not there yet, and I'm not sure they'll get there. So I'm concerned about that Michigan game. The Wisconsin game, the thing about Wisconsin is, haven't we seen this movie before? I mean, didn't we just see it 2 years ago? They went 12-0 in the regular season. They had statistically the number 1 defense in the country when we played them in the Big Ten title game. We played J.T. Barrett with 1 good leg in that game. I think we almost racked up 500 yards of total offense. Now, that game was way closer than it should have been because Barrett couldn't hit the goddamn broadside of a barn with a football for most of the game. But I feel like we've seen this movie before from Wisconsin. And once they haven't faced a good offense yet. I don't want to totally discredit it, but they're a one-trick pony on offense. Chad, you just made reference to that. And this kid, Jack Cohn, I mean, I just really feel like if you're going to beat Ohio State, you got to be dynamic in the passing game. And this kid is just, he's not. He's a consummate Wisconsin game manager. I'd be much more worried about that game if it was in Madison. But who knows? I guess we'll see. I think there's a very good chance we see that team twice. I think we're going to see him again in the Big Ten title game. I took a total flyer on Iowa coming out of the West. I'm regretting that pick more and more every day. I was way off on that one, I think.
Does Minnesota? They would have to play Wisconsin, right? Are they for real?
I mean, I just totally forgot about that. They're 6-0 so far, and their next 2 games are against Rutgers and Maryland. They're going to be 8-0 going into November. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, where is that game going to be played? Is that just fool's gold? I tend to think, I mean, that's just a product of the schedule, right? I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it seems so.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just interested in Minnesota walloped somebody yesterday.
Nebraska.
Yeah. So and aren't they undefeated?
Yeah. So Wisconsin and Minnesota play on the last week of the regular season, November 30th at Minnesota. Interesting.
That could be ugly.
And didn't Minnesota beat them last year? They beat Wisconsin last year. They did. I don't know. I guess are we right? Maybe I shouldn't be so dismissive of Minnesota, but I don't know. I guess we'll see what happens. That's pretty interesting. That's an interesting little sidebar. No one's really paying any attention, but there's a very good chance that team is 8-0 going into November.
Yeah, definitely.
Any other thoughts on remaining games on the schedule before we move on, guys?
The only other thing I'd say, Zach, is that, the other point to Michigan, which I hadn't given much thought to, and I don't disagree, that's a very tough game, always is I don't think Penn State's going to be that hard. I think the bigger dynamic for this team might be if they're actually 11-0 going to play a Michigan team that's not playing for anything. We've been to that movie before.
Yeah.
And, how Day handles that will be a big test.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, hey, back to Paige, your concern before the season started, or question, I should say, which was that how is Ryan Day going to handle getting this team up for big games, which Urban Meyer was masterful at doing.
Yeah.
And
was John Cooper directing those movies, Timmy, that you just referenced?
Yes, he was.
If not, he financed him. He's the producer. Yeah. Well, okay. So, all right. Well, a lot of football left to be played, and we shall see how it all plays out. Okay, I got one other question related to the second half of the season, just kind of looking forward. Which Buckeye players, in your view, could win major individual awards? And this is just kind of for fun. I don't really give a shit about these individual awards because I think where these guys, how they play when they're at Ohio State, what they do on the field, and then, of course, where they're drafted in the NFL says a lot more about the program than some of these individual awards, which can be kind of political. But Chad, let me kick it over to you. Which Ohio State players do you think are in the running for major individual awards?
Well, I mean, obviously you had to say Chase Young.
Yeah. Outland and Lombardi. Right?
Kuda has a chance, I think, in the Thorpe, possibly. I tell you what really irks me a little bit is that J.K. is not getting the credit that he deserves. I mean, the kid, he's got actually more yards than Taylor does, and he's not getting any kudos at all, really.
He's second in the country in rushing.
Really?
Yeah, he's second in the country in rushing. Yeah.
I know. Wow. That's what I'm saying, but you don't really hear any, all you hear about is Taylor. But, we'll see. But Fields, I guess, obviously he's up there. I mean, he's leading the nation in, touchdown passes, is right, if I'm not mistaken, or having a rushing touchdown and a passing touchdown in the game, that hasn't been done in I don't know how many years. But so, I mean, it's pretty cool to see. There's a lot of studs, on that team. So
yeah, okay, good. Matt, are we leaving anybody out for individual awards? What do you think?
I don't know about those awards. Maybe the Coach Washington will get the Bruno Mars Award for best linebacking coach, or whatever the fuck they call that award.
That's right. Sure.
All right, Paige, what do you think?
Always fun to go behind Sloaner. How about Fields? Making a serious run at the Heisman. I think that Day has purposely, not unleashed him yet. And I think we're going to be in prime time just about every single game. And if we can run the table, how does that guy not become, at least on stage in New York for the Heisman? How does that not happen?
That's a really good point. It does feel as though they've been kind of saving him for the second half of the year. And should he play big in the Wisconsin, Penn State, and Michigan games, yeah, you could be right. I mean, he would definitely position himself with an undefeated season, 12-0 season. He'd put up numbers, right, for Ohio State to get there to 12-0. You'd have to send him to New York.
Sure.
All right, well, I'm going to move things along here. Tim, I know you got to jump soon. So I think, guys, you've covered pretty much all the players I would have mentioned for individual awards. Let's look around the country. There were some intriguing matchups and some intriguing results around the country that I think we should talk about, starting with Georgia losing to South Carolina. I think that that result there I think that has to be something Ohio State fans are happy about, not only because of where that puts them in the polls and in the playoff rankings when they come out, but also that means you got the two best teams in the division opposite Bama and Auburn now with one loss, Florida and Georgia, and I think that helps. That certainly helps Ohio State's playoff positioning. Does anybody want to comment? Chad, why don't I go to you? What were your comments? What were your observations of what you saw in that Georgia game yesterday?
That they're not as good as advertised.
Yeah,
I think, but kudos to Will Muschamp, man. He's been through a lot of shit, and it was good to see him. And then they even had their starting quarterback, go out of the game because he I think it was in concussion protocol, if I'm not mistaken. So they had their backup quarterback in there playing. But, it was, obviously Georgia's got some ballers. But I think that Georgia's not as good as they, I guess Kirby Dumb, because he's wishing he had Fields right now over Fromm, because he was not impressive yesterday whatsoever. Yeah. I think he had 3 interceptions.
He did.
Something like that.
Yeah.
But, Clemson, when they played big Florida State, Jesus, the ACC is just a train wreck.
It's terrible.
Miami actually finally won a game.
Yeah, how about that?
Who was it, Virginia? Yeah. So,
Tim, what did you see out of the Georgia game and maybe some other the national results that stood out to you?
I didn't really see the game. I saw some of the highlights, but yeah, I agree with Fromm had an off day, but even still, if you're the number 3 team in the country playing a team with a losing record, you're supposed to be able to overcome that.
Yeah.
So I think Georgia might be a little bit overrated, and yeah, I agree with the sentiment that I think Fields probably smirking watching that game. I did watch the Penn State-Iowa game, and I just was not impressed with either team. I thought Iowa's defense kind of came to play. I thought Penn State's defense looked okay, but I thought both of those offenses looked abominable. Absolutely terrible. And so I don't, it doesn't bode well for the Big Ten, and I'm just not really all that afraid of Penn State. I didn't see any of the Wisconsin score, of the game, but saw the score, and they certainly put a thumping on Michigan State. But I guess I kind of look at that, and as we talked about, I think Michigan State might have been tenderized from last week a little bit, having to play Ohio State.
Exactly. That was my thought, exactly.
Both on the road. So, I think they were probably a little bit beaten up. Didn't see any of the Oklahoma-Texas game, but, looked like a shootout, typical Big 12 shootout with not a lot of defense, and got to love our boy Joey Burrow.
Wow.
Don't count him out.
Yeah, I think he had 3 incompletions. I think he was something like 21 of 24. So back to your comments about...
Not only that, but some of the passes that he was throwing were darts in traffic that hit the guy exactly on the numbers in the hands, and it had to, otherwise somebody was either going to pick it off or deflect it. He's making big-time throws, that guy.
Big time, dude. NFL throws.
Big
right,
time.
Tony.
It was interesting because you had Penn State, Iowa in prime time. It started at 4:30 my time, 7:30 Eastern. Then at 8 Eastern, you had the Florida LSU game, and I was flipping back and forth between the two, and I felt like I was watching. Games that were in completely different leagues, because LSU Florida, I saw athletes everywhere. I saw explosive plays everywhere. I saw more than beyond competent quarterback play. Stellar quarterback play. That kid from Florida wasn't too bad either. Burrow was awesome, but that was their backup quarterback. I think he threw for over 300 yards. Then you flip over to the Penn State-Iowa game, and it's 1981. And just to back you up, Tim, on what you had said, 294 yards of total offense for Penn State. That's all they needed to beat Iowa 17-12. Iowa outgained Penn State 356 to 294. Couple turnovers for Iowa seemed to be the difference in the game, but to me it seemed like we were looking at different eras of the college game when you're flipping back and forth between those two games. And I agree with you. Penn State looked a lot less scary facing a competent defense. And then going into the shoe, facing Ohio State, I'm a lot less concerned about that game than I was, before yesterday. Paige, did you happen to see either of those games? And I'm curious to get your observations.
So I didn't see any of the earlier games. I had the exact same impression that you did watching the LSU Florida game and the Iowa Penn State game. You were watching two games from different leagues, actually. But I get your point, right?
Right.
I mean, it was like watching Canton McKinley versus Massillon, and then you flip over and like, oh, that's a real college game there. Burrow was awesome. And so I think LSU is going to give Bama everything they can handle. I wonder where that game is.
So let me look that up. I'll find out. Burrow, 21 of 24 passing for 293. That game is in Tuscaloosa. That is on November the 9th. And what sucks for LSU is they're home against Auburn. Well, then they get a bye. Then they go to Alabama. That's in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah. And the other thing, it goes back to something Tim said earlier, like JT was his pet, it's like you're watching Joe Burrow. At one point he had like one incompletion. It was amazing. You're like, oh God, this guy was on our team for 4 years and he barely sniffed the field. Now I get it. He couldn't get past Haskins, although they said it was a super close race, but he's for real. LSU's for real. Their defense might be a little suspect. But, then I think the whole thing is then you sort of compare this, those teams to Ohio State, where's the weakness with Ohio State? We don't have one at this point. So I like where we're at, but a lot of football left to be played.
Matt, did you happen to see any of these games? And what were your impressions?
Well, the biggest impression I got is for two teams that were jawing all week about being DBU, there was a lot of passing yesterday. So I don't know. I don't know how that argument got settled. I think Buckeyes probably got the head of that. I like that. I think that if you want to put a final game of long-term predictions, LSU and Ohio State in the final game of the year.
Wow. Okay.
Juicy. How juicy.
Juicy. Yeah. I came away watching the action yesterday thinking that, well, first of all, I think Ohio State was helped by the fact that Florida and Georgia, who will come out of the division, I think it's the East, right? The SEC East. They would come out of the winner of that division will have at least one loss going into the SEC title game. And then you're going to have, Bama, LSU, Auburn, they all have to play each other. So we're not going to see I think it's very unlikely that we're going to see two legitimate playoff candidates coming out of the SEC this year. I think it's just going to be one team. So I thought that bodes pretty well for Ohio State. And of the top teams in the SEC, I don't think any of them is exceptional defensively. And somebody just made that reference. Matt, you made that reference, Paige. LSU, as good as they are on offense, they're not the typical lockdown defense that we've seen before this year. I think they're not quite as talented, not quite as dominant. Same can be said of Alabama, too. I don't think they're quite as good defensively. So I think should we match up with an SEC opponent in the playoff anywhere along the line, I think that bodes well for us. The other impression I got just looking at the national landscape, I don't think anyone's going to beat Oklahoma in the Big 12. I think Texas, to me, looked several notches below Oklahoma. There were some early turnovers in that game. I did actually watch quite a bit of the Red River rivalry. And Texas had a stay of execution in that game because of two early turnovers in the red zone by Jalen Hurts. And to me, I know the final score was only a touchdown. Oklahoma wins 34-27. But to me, I never felt like Texas was going to get control of that game and win it. And looking at the rest of Oklahoma's schedule, there's nobody left on that schedule that's going to compete with them. They're probably going to see Texas again in the Big 12 title game on a neutral field. And I like Oklahoma in that game. I think Oklahoma's coming out of that conference. I really do. So those are my kind of just overall impressions of what I saw nationally. And then, Tim, I would agree with you on Penn State we haven't mentioned our friends from up north, Paige, as you like to refer to them, Michigan, going up 28-0 over Illinois, and then giving up 25 unanswered to turn that game into a nail biter. We just continue to be unimpressed by Michigan. It's Ohio State's conference to lose. I really believe that. And I think I do think they need to go undefeated. I do. You don't want to risk a loss. And I think they're looking at playing Wisconsin twice, too, before it's all said and done. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll see how it plays out. Any other comments on the national landscape, guys?
None here.
None? Okay. Hey, this is a great effort. I think we're well over an hour, guys. Tim, I know you got to bounce. It's getting late on the East Coast. Unless there are any other comments, I think we should shut her down, and we'll connect midweek.
All right.
Sounds good.
Like a plan.
All right, fellas. Have a great night. Thanks for making the time, and go Bucks.